Everyone. Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. We are live on YouTube today because Facebook has decided to just not be our friend. We'll leave it at that. But welcome, everybody. I'll just let folks come into our webinar, and we're going to point some of our Facebook friends over to our YouTube page. I'll give a shout out to our YouTube page right now. It's great that we have it. We do have a custom vanity now on YouTube. It's youtube.com with April Berg right afterwards. So that's a great way to find us if for some reason we are not readily available. Well, welcome everyone. I'm April Berg, and this is Kitchen Conversations. We are joined today by Michelle Dinh. She's amazing. She is a teacher of sixth graders, which I will tell you is a very difficult age. And she is also a recent graduate. Her degrees focus in some amazing things, gender, women, and sexuality studies, as well as diversity. And she's also a champion and advocate for youth. Michelle is a Vietnamese-American daughter of refugees with a background in event coordination, digital marketing, advocacy, humanitarian work, and now she's teaching. And her personal vision and mission is to create a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable future through education, community, and healing. So, Michelle, welcome to Kitchen Conversations. Welcome to my kitchen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just excited to have you. I feel like as I, told the folks at home a little bit about you, that you are so perfectly positioned for where we are at this point in time, right? To be a teacher in this day and age is difficult in a perfect scenario, and we are clearly not perfect. So, when we went back to school last month, we knew that the kids were going to struggle with things like anxiety and depression, which, our schools struggle with really in the best of times. And so I guess I'll just start off by asking you, how are kiddos coping? How are your students coping with the new year? And how do you feel like your school is adapting to the needs of their students?
Honestly, going into it, I was extremely nervous just because I'm like, oh, there's no way like kids are gonna log on every day.
Mhm.
There's no way like engagement is gonna be as well as everyone thinks it is,
Yeah,
even if it is
yeah.
mandatory. Just based on my like student teaching experience, we probably had like anywhere from half to three-fourths of the class usually show up. And then on some days we would have like a quarter of the class show up. And so
Yeah.
the attendance varied
Oh.
a lot when we were transitioning last year
Mhm.
onto virtual learning. And then this year, when the district rolled out the schedule and like the expectations for what teachers are going to be teaching and everything, I was like, yeah, there's no way this is happening.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think as we started to get logged on and become familiar with like new norms and everything,
Mhm.
the kids, they proved me wrong. And I think they proved a lot
Awesome.
of adults wrong. And, they are resilient beings, they are strong and resilient. But
Yeah,
at the same time, they know that they are also going through it. Um,
yeah.
so as resilient as they are, I think we all are, and they especially are transitioning into this like new normal.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so they're doing the best that they can. And I think that's
Yeah.
like a rule or a norm that I have in my classroom where it's like, I know things are weird right now. And so I need you to do what you need to do
Yeah.
to stay focused, engage, and like participate, whatever those might look like for you.
Yeah. That's huge because I mean, you're talking about separation from peers, right? Missed experiences like homecoming, Halloween's coming up. And then on top of that, you pile on health concerns and maybe some interesting family dynamics. And so what would you see just overall, or what are you hearing? What are some of the biggest impacts on students?
I think a lot of the kids just miss being around people. Like they miss their
Mhm.
friends, they miss being around classmates, they miss the dynamic of a
Yeah.
classroom. And
Hmm.
I think that's something that they are having a difficult time coping with. It's just not being in that space. Because
Yeah.
school, as um, I guess like harmful as it could be to some people
Mm-hmm.
sometimes,
Hmm.
it is also a safety net for some of these kids.
Yeah.
It's a spot of comfort. It's a space of like individualism and like exploration and learning for these kids. And so they're missing it. I
Yeah.
that.
And that's huge because I think for me, and I've talked to some educators on the show, and there's a lot of talk about anxieties. And so I think there are some kiddos that are thriving at home. But to your point, there are some where that safety net and that safety comes from being at school and the regimen, right? Of being there every day, 5 days a week, knowing that someone's checking in on you or looking out if you're not okay. And so I guess in that same vein, what would, have you seen any big fears come out of it? Like, have students expressed any fears to you about this new normal that we're in?
Yeah, I think a big fear that came out of my kids at the beginning of the year, and even
Mhm.
it's probably still lingering inside of them as we're still addressing these
Yep.
anxieties and fears that they have, is them not being able to pass sixth grade, or like, what is I'm not
Oh,
doing enough? Like, and in our
yeah.
district, sixth grade is still considered elementary school. And
Yep.
so they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm not gonna be able to go to middle school. I'm not gonna have this
Oh,
lived
no,
experience. And I'm
no,
like,
no,
no,
no.
that's like not how it works, like
Yeah.
you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And then just this mindset of like, I was behind last year in spring already. So like, what's the point of doing anything now?
Yeah.
I'm already super behind all of my other
Yeah.
classmates. And
Oh
so they're
gosh.
just kind of stuck in this like hole of like not wanting to try anymore.
Oh,
Because they feel behind.
that's hard to hear. And I think, but that also speaks to kind of that pressure cooker we have some of our kiddos in that it breaks my heart to hear someone say, that we would be failing sixth grade, right? Like, cause that's not normal and you're not going to fail and we're going to meet you where you're at. Speaking of our middle schoolers, I've got one kind of walking in behind me. It's the joys of working from home. But so yeah, no, I think, and that breaks my heart, right? To hear that kids would be anxious about that, because I think your district, just like the one I serve in, we're committed to getting the kids, to that next grade, to that next level. We're not leaving anybody behind, and we're going to help to get them there. So I guess in that kind of off of that question, has there been any surprises for you? Anything that's either challenges that bigger than you expected, or anything that students and teachers have maybe coped with better than you expected? So yeah, like good and bad. Any surprises?
Um, in terms of what?
Well, I would say just in terms of the new normal, right? So we've got the Zoom learning. Even some schools I know are adapting different things like trunk or treat, to help for
Mhm.
Halloween and just things to get kids a little more social. Or I've heard of some creative ways of doing freshman events where they did them, in a big drive-through and kind of, did a radio station address kind of to the freshmen to welcome them in. So I would say for you, like have your sixth graders, because I'm thinking about that as being a big milestone for a kiddo moving from elementary to middle school. Have there been maybe some bigger challenges, some things that you thought were, wow, that was worse than I thought it was going to be, or things where you're like, that worked out, like didn't think it would, but yeah, that worked out.
Yeah, for sure. I think no matter what class you walk into, you will automatically see that every single teacher, educator, they're doing
Mhm.
their best, and
Yeah.
everyone is at different levels of familiarity with technology.
Oh,
And
that's a big one. Yeah.
And I think like to that, every class is different in like how engaged students are, or how students are
Hmm.
engaging with materials. And so I think something that works really well is just um, making lessons fun as possible. Because
Yes.
as someone who's like recently out of college, and I cannot I don't have the attention span to sit in a lecture and like just listen to
Yeah.
the teacher. Like, but if you play a game with me to teach the lesson, I'm
Hmm.
all game, I'm in it.
Yeah.
And so I feel like my kids are very much similar to that. And I try not to assign too much homework, because I think I'm pretty um I think I'm pretty in tune with like pop culture and like
Hmm.
social norms and all of these things. And like just seeing how a lot of students ages like K through high school on like
Hmm.
TikTok or social media or whatever, talk about like, why are teachers assigning homework every day? It doesn't make any sense. We would not
Yeah,
be
I can
doing this much
imagine.
work if we were in class. And I'm like, that
Yeah.
makes sense to me. So like, why would I do that to
Why
my
would you do it?
if I
That's
want to do it.
if
Yeah.
you, yeah, no, that's a good point. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one thing, we talked about earlier was that you graduated from the district that you're teaching in,
Yeah.
which I think is awesome. And like, full disclosure, you graduated the same year that my son graduated. So I think that's awesome, because you've got that perspective and you can be that kind of cool teacher. I'm not that cool mom apparently, but that's a whole nother episode. But from that perspective, right? So what it was like when there wasn't COVID, to be in the classrooms that you're in, to be in the district that you're in. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about that difference? And beyond maybe not assigning as much homework as other teachers, but are there some differences that does it influence how you work in your classroom and your interactions with your students?
Yeah, for sure. So, if I'm being entirely honest with you, at first when I was like starting to apply for jobs and everything, I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of prepared to like not have a job this year. And it was just mainly because like maybe there was like a job freeze or something, or like, districts weren't hiring, they weren't sure how many students they were having.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, maybe I shouldn't apply. But then I think someone close to me was like, why wouldn't you apply? You are literally in
Exactly.
the class that is the most prepared for COVID. Like your
Yeah.
student teaching experience that transition. And
Wow.
you, and thinking of that, I'm like, that's like kind of true. Like
Yeah.
we are the most ready for this because we were all game when we were student teaching,
Mm-hmm.
and we
Mm-hmm.
we were on top of it, and we did these or we did this with the mentors that we were all working with.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think in having that experience and like having that whole thing happen and being in a cohort that I was able to talk about this through or talk
Yep.
about it with, was kind of like a big game changer. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm ready for this.
That's huge. I didn't even think about that, because you're right. You are the most prepared. Your cohort, your class was the most prepared. But also too, my brain kind of went there, was like, you're digital natives, right? You grew up on computers.
Yeah.
You grew up with the technology. This isn't, I mean, I'm sure it's new in terms of some of the modalities that you're implementing in your classroom, but it's not new in the sense of, how do we share a spreadsheet, or how do we, do different things. You grew up doing that stuff. That's huge.
Yeah.
And I guess so, to your point too, let's talk about communication. I know the sun is doing its own thing today on both of our screens. I'm kind of trying to move away from it. But just communication, and that communication between teachers and parents, at any point in time, it's really, really important. But right now, it's so important. And so, how is that level of communication? And as we kind of transform into this dialogue about student wellness, how are the kids really holding up in this new normal, and with the communication potential barriers between teachers and parents?
Yeah, I feel like, parents are also human and they are also going through
Yeah.
it, and there
Yeah.
has to be some kind of like humanizing in that area. Like as much as they are responsible for their kids and taking care of
Yep.
their kids, they are also taking care of themselves.
That's
And
true.
everyone's grinding out there. Everyone is,
Yeah.
getting that bag and like doing what they need to do to put food on the table for their families.
That
And
is a good point.
I really try not to overwhelm them with communication, but I don't want to
Mhm.
under communicate either. So
Yeah.
finding that perfect balance of like not spamming parents
Yeah.
has been
Hmm.
really difficult. But I think the best thing that has worked for me was, just doing one message, one long
Hmm.
newsletter or like email for
Oh,
the
that's a
week,
good
like
idea. Hmm.
saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on. And then if I
Yep.
start to see students, missing class or missing
Hmm.
assignments or
Yep.
anything like that, then I kind of talk to the students. And if that doesn't
Okay.
get fixed in that moment, then we take it to the parents and see
To
like
the
what kind
parents.
of plan we can create.
Yep.
And I don't approach parents in the sense of like, oh, it's your fault, or like,
Yeah. That's
your
good. Yeah.
student failing or whatever, because what's the point of that? It
Exactly.
does, it's not proactive, it doesn't do anyone.
Exactly.
good.
Any good? No, well, I like your approach because it gives the parents a lot of grace. And I like the fact that you brought up that they're grinding it out too, right? So we're talking about families with potential food insecurities and they're not sure about their jobs and their mortgages and things like that. So I think as a teacher, I've always felt, even pre-COVID, that teachers take on so much of society's issues, right? You provide the social safety net for families and for students. Now you add a pandemic into it. And sometimes the last thing you can think about is teaching reading and math, right? You're thinking about, have you eaten? Have you slept? Is
Yeah.
everything okay? So that is huge. And I think part of what a lot of folks are talking about in this moment is opportunity, right? So there's an opportunity here to do things differently. And so I guess my question would be, is there an opportunity in addressing these difficulties at this moment to really invest in teaching things like social emotional awareness, interpersonal communication, coping strategies in ways that we can replicate that in the future, right? So once we're over this crisis, can we have some real wins for our educational system when it comes to social emotional well-being?
Yes.
Yeah, you're just like, am I speaking your language
Yes,
now?
yes. Yeah, like I went into education like with the intention to like really decolonize it. And
Awesome. Oh, I love
like
that.
I really want us to like the new generation of teachers, we need to do the work, like we knew what it was like growing up in a K through 12 public system. And so like we're here to decolonize it, mess it up, make it messy, whatever it is. Like now is the perfect time. It's already messy. Just go with it.
Just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that
so
is awesome.
something I have really been working on with students is talking about emotions and like social emotional learning. How do you advocate for yourself? How do you push yourself through all of this? And how do you remain resilient? And using words just as they are, like, and there's really no sugarcoating it. It's just like things are hard right now, and we're gonna talk about it. And like, if you're not ready to talk about it, at least give other people your listening ear.
Exactly.
So that it can motivate you to also talk about it, because it's important and we need one another. And then in a time like this, I feel like classroom communities are one of the few communities that we're like really close to as a classroom. And so, just building that through talking about feelings and talking about our situations is really important. And I never force them or, ask them to talk about like, tell me about your personal details, give me the like 411, give me all of it. Like that's
exactly.
That's not
it's not being nosy. Yeah, exactly.
But, if they feel the need to like ever email me and then just, tell me what's going on, like I'm all ears. And, I always explicitly tell them like, I want to extend this grace to you, because you guys have been amazing to me. So
yeah, that's huge. Well, and I think I'm just glad that whole thing, decolonizing education, right? And for me, if you guys have for our viewers out there that watch the show, I always come out with a mantra from our time together, whoever I'm talking to, doesn't matter. And so my mantra for this is going to be decolonizing education. I've like highlighted it, underlined it. It's just, I think that's something that we all could kind of just take in and sit with for a minute. And so I guess practically speaking, right? So what does this look like now that we're doing so much distance learning? How do we make a more holistic practice, like holistic practices like wellness checks, a regular part of this distance learning experience?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of check-ins with students, whether it's through Google Forms, whether it's a class discussion. Districts also send out wellness forms where they can
the
rate.
surveys.
I don't know how much they do with that information or like what the intention behind it is quite yet, just because I'm a new educator into the field. But I'm hoping that they use that information to put out resources for students, depending on the results of the survey.
Yeah, no, and I think that's huge. And I'm glad you brought that up because as a parent, with kids in our district, we get surveys a lot. And I think, to your point, what are we doing with that information and how are we going to utilize it to help kiddos? We want to know where folks are at, but we also want to help people. And I think much like kids have different learning styles, kids and parents have different communication styles. So, a survey to one household might be a Google form to another, might be a personal check-in, right, from you as a teacher. But I think so, just as I'm thinking about this, right, that sounds busy and tiring, forms and surveys. I'm fatigued, and I'm hearing a lot about COVID fatigue. I'm
Mhm.
feeling a little COVID fatigue, honestly, as a parent. I'm tired. And so as we're talking about this stuff, right, people around the world, around in our country, we're mentally and emotionally drained for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons, all stemming from this pandemic. So I guess, I'm thinking about the trauma that goes on in a kiddo's brain as they're seeing their parents tired, as they're seeing their society tired. But how do you think that trauma is impacting kids at this point? Or have you seen any impact to the kiddos that you're working with from this COVID fatigue?
Man, I feel like because kids are so resilient at this point, they
Mm,
don't realize
that's
that
a good
they're
point.
going through trauma, you know?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, I could see that. Yeah, they're not owning it as trauma. They're not saying,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I see where you're going with
I
that.
mean, unless like I think at this point, like the whole COVID thing, we're feeling some sort of collective trauma, whether it's
Absolutely.
consciously or subconsciously, we're all experiencing it together. And
Hmm.
some
Hmm.
people might feel it firsthand just because they know someone or they themselves have experienced COVID.
Yep.
Um, but there are kids who don't know anyone, are not like
Hmm.
super close to it, um,
Yeah.
but they themselves are also experiencing this internal trauma that no one is really
Yeah.
talking about. And I
Yeah.
think if we bring social emotional learning into the classroom, this is a space for us, a space and a time for us to talk
Hmm.
about what is trauma, and like why is trauma important to talk about,
Exactly.
and how do we heal and how do we cope. And so
Yeah.
talking about these things explicitly is really important, especially in the classroom.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, and that because I think you're right. I know you're right. Let me put it that way. Talking about it is huge, and I'm thinking back to some students that I've been talking with and hearing at different forums. And the one thing they keep saying that I think as educators we need to pay attention to is make sure the student voice is heard. Make sure the student voice is brought into the conversation. Make sure the student voice is at the table. And I think and that goes back to what you're saying about talking about it, right? Like really getting it out, having those, allowing for that cathartic space, if you will, for folks
Yeah.
to really talk about what they're feeling. Because I think you're right about that trauma piece of it too. A lot of kids don't know they're going through it. And, as adults, we do some chair time, right? What I call sometimes when I yell at my kids, I go, oh, yeah, that's going to be a chair time. Because eventually at some point we want to unpack some of our traumas, right? Either from our childhood or from maybe schooling or workplace, whatever. And so I think this is going to be, there's going to be a lot of chair time out there for kiddos going through this right
Yeah.
now.
It's kind of like
Um,
when you go through,
yeah,
like, if you get into like a car accident or something,
yep, exactly.
initially you don't feel that pain if it's like a minor
Yeah.
accident, but like, a couple days later or a couple days when, everything has kind of calmed down, you're like, oh, I'm in so much pain.
Now you're in pain. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was recently in a car accident, and literally, for weeks they kept finding other things wrong with me. And people said, "Well, how could they not found that in the first night?" It's like, well, the first night it was the big stuff, right? Like the big breaks and fractures. And then over the next few weeks, they kept saying, "Oh, this is wrong. This is tweaked. This is," and I'm like, "Yeah." So it's your body. Your body does what it does to keep you safe and sane, but eventually all of it catches up to you. So that's huge. Well, let's land this plane on equity. I mean, that's, it's one of those things where even in a perfect world, equity is an issue. And we weren't a perfect world before COVID. And so in our schools, in our state, equity has always been an issue.
Yeah.
And so as we check in with students and try and get them into this conversation with their teachers about what they're experiencing, is there room to build awareness and maybe additional access and resources to talk about equity in the classroom?
Yes, always room for equity in the
Yeah,
class. No questions to it.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
honestly, I'm gonna go back to that whole piece of like decolonizing education.
yeah,
Everyone is kind of in their own classroom, in their own space, and what they're doing with the curriculum that they're given is so important. So like,
yeah.
how are you decentering whiteness and giving voices to marginalized
Mm,
people,
communities.
students,
Hmm.
communities, and then like taking those surveys, that the districts or, anyone is sending out to families, not only looking at resources
Hmm.
that we can provide students and like the results, but also
Mm-hmm.
what are we doing with the data of like
Yeah.
who are these things impacting, you
Yeah.
know?
That's a good point.
And so looking at the people, not only the results, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I really want to go back to that and emphasize that, because a lot of us, especially people of color and like Black,
Mm-hmm.
Indigenous communities, we are all in survival mode. You know,
Yeah.
we're really doing what we can to survive at this point, especially with the leadership that we have or lack thereof. And so we really have to give grace to families and
Absolutely.
take different approaches, you know, be open
Yeah.
to new approaches, be open to admitting that maybe the approach you took was wrong, and then
Mm-hmm.
try something
Mm-hmm.
new.
Yeah, no, and that's huge. I think I'm right there with you. I think we have an opportunity now to rethink education from its foundation. And I always like to go back to the analogy of a moonshot, right? So we have an opportunity for moonshots, because I think if someone had told you 9 months ago we're going to shut down all education across the country and move everybody to online learning in less than a week, you'd be like, yeah, no. Like that's the first thing most people would say is you can't do that. There's no way that can happen. Well, it did. And so it clearly could happen. Was it perfect? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But by that moonshot occurring, it doesn't, for me, it doesn't allow the word can't or won't in my vocabulary when we're talking about educational changes, because we know we can do we can do anything. The question is, what should we do, and what are our priorities going to be as we start to rethink education for our kiddos. But Michelle, I cannot thank you enough for having this conversation. It's been powerful, and just to let you know, it's stemmed with a lot of questions that I've had from voters, and it basically boils down to, are the kids all right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to answer that question for folks watching. Are the kids all right? And after talking to you, I know that they're not right. They're not all right. But if we work together, we can get there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but thank you so much, Michelle Dinh, for coming on Kitchen Conversations, having this conversation about social and emotional learning in our schools. It's been wonderful. And thank you to viewers at home who have watched this, because I think you've learned a lot, just like I have, especially that mantra, this week's mantra, decolonizing education. So have a great rest of your week, everyone. And Michelle, thank you. And you have a good one. And your kids are really lucky to have you in the classroom. Can I just say that? You're just awesome. I wish you were my sixth grade teacher. It's just amazing. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye now.